Welcome to this week's show. Esther, I'm so excited to have you on to talk about your skill because I already know what it's going to be, and it's one that I know that I love and use on a regular basis too. So I'm excited to get into it with you. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about who are you? What do you do?
I am a therapist at a place called the Mood Treatment Center in Winston-Salem. We also have other locations in Boone and Greensboro and High Point, and now coming up Charlotte, actually. But that's happening in the future, I think next year sometime. And I'm originally from Germany, and I have been a counselor since 2018 here with the Mood Treatment Center. And
Yeah. How did you get into doing counseling? Like, how did you find this calling?
yeah. So my dad is a therapist, so I guess I grew up with it, and now my sister is actually a therapist too. So I guess I don't know. It's just the family calling or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, came by it very honestly. Um, what about, so I know your background is in DBT, and it's something that like I'm trained in as well. I've been doing it for more years than I can count now, but what kind of called you into doing DBT? Like, how did that kind of get your interest?
Yeah. I think what appealed to me is I think when I first started, a lot of times clients ask me for skills, and I and DBT is just so tangible in um teaching you the step-by-step skills, and I really love that, and I've seen it help so many people
Mhm.
who've struggled intensely, so and the research supports it, so I think all of those things combined just makes it a great approach for me.
Yeah, yeah. I also really like that it's very tangible, right? There's definitely some very specific like strategies and tools that we can kind of name and like
Yeah.
kind of almost like coping game plans that we can kind of put together with some of those tools that help it to feel a little bit more concrete sometimes. Yeah. So what is your go-to skill? It's one of the DBT skills, certainly, but what is it that you use yourself?
Yeah, so I love the skill of finding wise mind. Um, that's that's my favorite skill. And do you want me to explain it as I'm
Yeah.
yeah. So the idea is that we have different states of minds, and dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, is all about, finding the middle ground between two extremes. So in this situation, the two extremes are rational mind, where you're um, operating based on logic and facts. And I don't know, I kind of think of maybe a robot or artificial intelligence when I think of complete rational mind. And or characters, maybe I forgot his, but the guy in the Big Bang Theory,
Yes,
or
Sheldon. Yes.
Sheldon, yeah. And then emotion mind, is, when our decisions are driven by impulses, instincts, that those short term, what feels good now, um,
Mhm.
that's more emotion mind. Um, and um, yeah, so I'm thinking as a profession, maybe like an artist or someone who's like, in those professions that can come in really handy. Um, and both have their pros and cons. If we didn't have emotion mind, the emotion mind helps us with empathy and our relationships with other people, and then rational mind helps us make decisions based on facts, um and not get caught up in any kind of distorted thinking so
Yeah.
much. And then so I think there's this idea that we should always be logical creatures, and that there isn't as much value to the emotional part of our mind, which as I just said, I think both have important advantages and disadvantages. So what DBT says is that the middle ground between the two of them is a place called wise mind. And that's basically when it withstands time. So it doesn't operate based on what feels good now, but what is the best decision for you in the long run. It's maybe, I often think of, how when you're emotionally wrapped up in a situation, it's hard to, sometimes what the decision is that you should make probably, but it's so hard to do. But when you have a friend in front of you, you know exactly kind of how to talk them through it. And sometimes it's when I ask clients, like, what advice would you give a friend in this situation? That's when their wise mind really comes out, because we know it logically, and also we obviously care about this person. So emotion mind also plays a role because we're empathetic. So, and sometimes we lose that empathy when it comes to ourselves too. When it comes to ourselves, all of a sudden we're like, well, I shouldn't be feeling this. I'm stupid for feeling this. All of those kinds of things, which isn't really coming from wise mind, but more rational mind fighting with emotion mind.
Yes.
So in the middle is kind of like taking care of yourself emotionally while also looking at the facts in the situation and making a decision that feels right.
Yeah, because it definitely feels like in the moment, it feels like the emotion mind and that rational mind, they speak two different languages. So it's almost like they don't communicate well with each other. And it's sometimes it can feel like they're both talking at you at the same time. And it can be really hard to like integrate those two things. And it's hard because a wise mind, it's not like an on-demand feature where we can just like snap our fingers and, oh, I'm there. Right. It's something that we have to like work at a little bit. And sometimes we do need a little bit of time for that like intensity of emotion to kind of like settle a little bit. Which in and of itself, recognizing that we need time and holding off on that like decision or reaction, like in some ways is kind of that wise mind coming through and being like, hey, we gotta hang low for a moment here and just settle, and then we can kind of figure out what's going to be our path forward. But yeah, kind of giving that time for the integration of those two things to come together, because we do need to kind of have both at play.
Yeah. And like you said, sometimes they seem to be fighting against each other, and I think that's when decisions are really hard. And we've all been there where it seems like, it felt like the right decision, and it also, the facts lined up. That's when we know we're making a decision from wise mind. When emotional mind and rational mind kind of speak the same language, that's when it's easier to do. But when they're fighting against each other, it's so hard, and it's easy to let our emotion mind run away with us and do what feels good in the moment, and that may not be what's in our best interest in the long term. So even just asking myself or being aware, which state of mind am I operating out of? Am I operating out of emotion mind? Am I operating out of rational mind or wise mind? If I'm noticed, okay, I think I'm in emotion mind right now, then that's when what you came in or what you said comes in of, well, maybe I just need some time. Or what would wise mind tell me to do right now? And the way I find wise mind is, if I were a friend in this situation, what would I advise a friend of mine in this situation? And that's how I usually find my wise mind.
Yeah, it's really helpful to take that perspective, right? Because like we said earlier, it's much easier to bring compassion into the equation when we think about like, what would I say to somebody else? Because we are so much kinder to everybody else than we are to ourselves. So yeah, I think that that's a really great tool. What are some of the strategies that you use to like, in addition to kind of thinking about like, okay, what would I say to a friend? What are some of the strategies that you use to maybe differentiate between like emotion mind and wise mind? Because I know that there are times where the emotion mind, it dresses up for Halloween and it pretends like it is wise mind, and something feels so good in the moment, and then we do the thing, and then the next day we're like, wish I wouldn't have said that, or wish I wouldn't have done that. And so, how
Yeah.
do you differentiate, especially in those moments where the emotion mind is trying to be really convincing?
Mm-hmm. So it's funny that you say that, because actually a lot of times I struggle more than my clients have struggled more with seeing the difference between rational mind and wise mind. Because they're like,
Mm-hmm.
well, rational or wise mind does what's good for you. So that's pretty much just my rational mind. And I think I'll distinguish between all three of them. So between emotion mind, or between rational mind and wise mind, I think the difference is that wise mind has empathy and compassion, and rational mind often does not.
Mm-hmm.
Because rational mind doesn't take emotions and feelings into account, and
Yeah.
assumes that we should be perfectly rational beings, which we're not. None of us are. Um, and I think between emotion mind and wise mind, I can definitely see how emotion mind can trick you into thinking it's wise mind. Um, I think one word that comes to my mind is urgency. Of
Mm,
emotion mind just has to have this urgency of I need to do something now, like of it feels really intense.
yeah.
Whereas, maybe every now and again something does have to be completed in that moment, but like checking the facts of, does this really have to be done right now? Is that urgency real based on what the situation requires? Or am I just making that urgency up in my mind? And if I'm feeling really urgent, again, I think giving yourself time helps you then distinguish, is it really wise mind or is it maybe emotion mind? I think also like checking with a friend can be a great tool.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, bringing some attention to that urgency piece, I think is huge because
Uh,
that, also for me is kind of a huge indicator of like emotion mind versus that wise mind. Because emotion mind is very like, gotta react right now. Like it feels like it's now or never.
right,
And so, yeah. And it hardly ever is actually that urgent if we
right.
kind of like slow down and pause in that moment. And so, yeah, I think that's also something that I noticed too is a really helpful like thing to distinguish between the two. And yeah, I think thinking about just the overlap sometimes, or what feels maybe like an overlap between rational mind and wise mind, like the empathy piece is
Yeah.
really valuable, right? And thinking about sometimes that rational mind has like a rigidity to it where we are like, it's this way, it has to be this way. It's very like there's no kind of wiggle room.
Uh-huh.
Whereas there can be a little bit more like flexibility with that wise mind of, if down the road the information changes, like I can change my mind about this. I can do something different. But for right now, based on the information I have, like this is what feels kind of like the best thing. And there is a little bit more of that like freedom almost with
Yeah.
that wise mind.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and one thing that I really love about the skill is that I truly think I truly think everyone has a wise mind that they can access somewhere. And oftentimes in session when I ask people, that question of, if a friend of yours were in this situation and you had to give them some advice, what would you tell them? That's when I hear their wise mind coming out. So that's, I, as a therapist, it's not my place to really give people advice on what they should do with their lives, but that's oftentimes, I think, when people make the wisest statements and really come up with solutions that I believe will serve them well. So I think it's so powerful that we don't need to turn to other people necessarily to know the answers always. Sometimes there's value in that, but that really if we are able to access our wise mind, that's really powerful
Yeah.
in guiding us.
Yeah, yeah, it's such an awesome tool and it's something that because it's something we can do on our own, like it's really helpful. And can you think about a time for yourself like when this tool has been like really helpful for you or when you feel like you've used it and you saw the benefits of it?
Yeah. I think for sure when I maybe in friendships or relationships had a certain feeling about something and wanted to respond when emotional,
Mhm.
then I'd be like, okay, Esther, just hold off and don't do anything. Give yourself some time until you cool down, and then make a decision from wise mind, because right now is not a good decision, or
Mhm.
now right now is not a good time to, kind of that don't text when emotional. Um, yeah, let's see where this goes. Let's let things cool off. And then when you're able to get to wise mind, then you make a decision. And I think that serves relationships much better than, when you're feeling angry with someone, and then you might end up coming across passive aggressive, even if you try your best not to. Um, it's just, whereas in wise mind, then you can assess, is this something that needs to be addressed, or not? And if yes, how do I want to address that in the most helpful way?
Yeah.
So I find it really helpful in those situations.
Yeah. 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 It's a good way to kind of just check in with yourself to it seems like to make sure that you're feeling able to like respond to things that come up in those friendships rather than feeling like we're just reacting in the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if people want to learn more about Wise Mind or just DBT in general, like how do they do that?
Yeah, so there's lots of DBT groups. So find a DBT group near where you are. Um, we at my treatment center here, we have a virtual group on Thursdays, 4 to 6, and then we have an in-person group here in Winston-Salem on Tuesday evenings. So you can email DBT at moodtreatmentcenter.com, or you can find a DBT group in your area. I think in person always, at least I don't know, I have my own biases for in person. I think it's a um I don't know, I prefer the group experience that way.
Mhm.
Um and DBT is pretty widespread, so find a group in your area, find a therapist who does DBT.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right there. It is very widespread. There's providers in all the different states. And so if that's something that, that you're looking for, Psychology Today can be a good place to hop on. And I think you can filter for dialectical behavior therapy to find somebody who's got some experience and some training in that. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Esther, for joining us and talking about Wise Mind. I love this skill so much, and I feel like I could spend all day talking about it, but I feel like we kind of gave a good little summary of it, a good introduction. So thank you so much for your time.